Before humans built cities, before writing, before kings, calendars, or maps, someone walked into deep darkness and painted animals with a care that still feels strangely close to us. These were not simple marks of a primitive mind. They were made by people with memory, patience, fear, skill, and a way of seeing the living world that we may have partly lost. If human history began in silence, why do the oldest cave paintings seem to know so much? The 40,000-year-old cave paintings that know too much. Long before any wall carried a law, long before a clay tablet held a name, and long before a ruler could order history to remember him, human beings were already leaving signs in places where daylight almost never entered. The world outside was not empty. It was full of cold air, moving animals, sharp stone, hunger, fire, footsteps, and memory. People lived by noticing what changed around them. A broken twig could matter. A print in soft ground could matter. The direction of wind could matter. But inside certain caves, far away from the ordinary work of finding food and staying warm, they made marks that did not simply vanish with rain or footsteps. They touched stone with colour. They shaped animals out of lines. They placed hands against rock and left the outline of a body that had already turned away. This is where the question begins. Not with a fantasy about lost wisdom, but with a quiet fact. Before written history, some humans were already choosing to preserve images. They were not writing sentences as we understand them. They were not leaving explanations for us. Yet they were doing something that required attention, memory, and intention. To understand why these images feel so powerful, we have to begin with the human starting point itself. Homo sapiens did not appear as a creature already surrounded by libraries and maps. Our species began in a world where knowledge was carried in bodies, gestures, habits, voices, and remembered places. A child learned by watching. An adult survived by reading signs that the modern eye might pass over without noticing. In that kind of life, the boundary between seeing and knowing was thin. To see well was not decoration. It was safety, food, direction, and belonging. So when we look at very old cave paintings, we are not looking at art in the modern sense alone. We are looking at a trace of a mind trained by a living landscape. That does not mean every image had one simple purpose. It does not mean we can know what the painters believed. It means the images belong to a way of being human before history became a record kept by states. They come from a time when memory had to live close to the senses. The animal seen in daylight, the animal followed across open ground, the animal feared in the dark, and the animal painted on stone may not have been separate in the way modern categories separate them. The cave wall did not need to explain itself to us. It held an image in a place where the usual world became still. That stillness is important. Outside, tracks disappeared, bones scattered, smoke faded, voices died into air. But a line of pigment on stone could remain beyond the breath of the person who made it. For people with no writing, no metal, no cities, and no permanent monuments in the later sense, this act already changed the relationship between a human life and time. Something brief was placed against something lasting. A hand that could be injured, aged, or lost was pressed against a surface older than any human generation. This is one reason the paintings can seem to know too much. They do not speak, but they carry the pressure of a world where human attention had to be exact. They remind us that the beginning of human history was not silence because people lacked thought. It was silence because their thoughts were not yet stored in the forms we later learned to read. The cave painting stands at that edge. It is not a book, and it is not only a picture. It is a surviving trace of perception, made before the long age of written memory began. A cave is not only a hollow place in the earth. For early humans, it was a change in the world itself. Outside, the eye had sky, distance, weather, animal movement, and the shifting light of day. Inside, the body entered a different kind of space. Sound became heavier. Footsteps returned as echoes. Firelight did not spread evenly, but trembled against stone, making cracks, curves, and shadows appear to move. The air was cooler, sometimes damp, sometimes narrow enough to make the body aware of its own breathing. To walk into such a place was not like walking across open ground. It was to leave the ordinary surface of life and enter a zone where the senses had to slow down. This matters because the cave paintings were not made on just any surface. Many surviving images were placed on walls that required effort to reach, and in some cases they were far from the areas where people would normally sleep, cook, repair tools, or gather for daily life. That does not give us permission to invent a single explanation. It does suggest that the location itself was part of the act. A person had to bring light. A person had to carry pigment or prepare it nearby. A person had to stand close enough to the wall to follow its shape. The stone was not flat like a modern sheet of paper. It had ridges, bulges, hollows, stains, and natural lines. These surfaces may have guided the images. A curve of rock could become the back of an animal. A swelling in the wall could suggest a shoulder. A crack could mark a boundary or a motion. The painter did not simply place an image on a neutral background. The painter worked with a living surface, or at least a surface that changed under light, touch, and distance. This is where the deep beginning of human perception becomes important again. Our species did not first learn the world through symbols on a clean page. We learned through bodies moving in uneven spaces, through eyes following shapes in grass, stone, cloud, hide, and shadow. Long before writing made thought portable, attention was trained by places. A cave gathered that attention in a concentrated way. It removed the open horizon and replaced it with closeness. It turned sound inward. It made light rare. It made each mark more deliberate, because darkness had to be pushed back before a line could even be seen. In this sense, the cave was unlike a village wall, unlike a campsite, unlike a trail. It was not part of the everyday flow of weather and movement. It was a pocket of time. When a mark was placed there, it could be protected from rain, sun, and ordinary erosion far better than a mark exposed outside. That practical fact alone helps explain why we still see some of these images today. But survival is not the same as purpose. Many things may have disappeared from open-air places, leaving caves overrepresented in what archaeology can recover. So we should be careful. We are not seeing the whole mind of prehistoric people. We are seeing what happened to survive under special conditions. Yet those conditions shaped our modern encounter with the paintings. The darkness makes them feel private. The depth makes them feel intentional. The long survival makes them feel as if they have crossed an impossible distance to meet us. A cave changes the scale of a human act. A line drawn in daylight may belong to a moment. A line drawn deep inside stone can seem to belong to time itself. That is why the setting matters so much. The old paintings do not only show animals, hands, and marks. They also show that early humans were already choosing places where memory could become quiet, protected, and strangely durable. The feeling that these cave paintings know too much does not come from a hidden code we have already solved. It comes from a meeting between two kinds of distance. One distance is time. Tens of thousands of years stand between the person who made the mark and the person who looks at it now. The other distance is understanding. We can measure pigments, compare styles, study layers of mineral growth, examine animal species, and map where images appear in a cave. But we cannot simply step into the mind that chose a line, a colour, or a wall. That gap creates a powerful impression. The paintings look near, because a horse, a bison, a hand, or a curve of movement can still be recognised. They also feel far away, because the world that produced them has almost completely disappeared. No one living today belongs to that exact climate, that exact landscape, that exact chain of remembered gestures, that exact pressure of survival. The image remains, but the voice around it is gone. That is why the question must be handled carefully. To say the paintings know too much should not mean that they prove secret science, lost civilization, or impossible knowledge. It should mean something quieter and more difficult. They show that very early humans were already capable of seeing with a precision that unsettles modern assumptions. They noticed bodies in motion. They remembered animal shapes after the animal had vanished. They used the wall not only as stone, but as a surface that could hold attention across time. And they did all of this before the tools that later societies used to define intelligence: writing, farming, cities, mathematics, official records, and named authors. The beginning of human history, then, cannot be imagined as a blank childhood of the mind. Our species had already carried a long biological inheritance: eyes that followed movement, hands able to control pressure, brains able to connect memory with action, and social lives where knowledge passed from one body to another. A hunter-gatherer world was not simple just because it left fewer objects behind. It demanded a kind of intelligence that was immediate, embodied, and deeply tuned to place. When that intelligence appears on a cave wall, it can look almost out of place to us, because we often expect ancient things to look crude in every way. But the paintings disturb that expectation. They remind us that technological simplicity is not the same as mental simplicity. A person may live without metal and still read an animal's weight from a footprint. A group may live without writing and still remember roots, seasons, danger, kinship, and stories over many generations. A painter may live without a city and still understand how a curved line can make a still wall feel alive. The shock is not that prehistoric people were magically advanced. The shock is that they were human in ways that modern life sometimes makes harder to recognize. We have gained books, screens, instruments, and archives, but we have lost some daily intimacy with tracks, hides, weather, darkness, and animal presence. The cave paintings stand in that exchange. They do not accuse us. They do not explain themselves. They remain calm and silent, carrying evidence of attention from a world before written memory. To look at them honestly is to accept both sides at once. We know enough to see skill, age, and intention, but not enough to close the mystery. The feeling that they know too much may be the feeling that human seeing began deeper than our usual history admits, and that some of what was once ordinary knowledge has become strange to us. The first hand on a cave wall is one of the quietest signs a human being can leave. It does not show a face, it does not tell us a name, it does not explain age, language, fear, or memory. Yet it brings the body closer than almost any painted animal can. A hand mark says, without words, that a living person stood here, close enough to the stone to touch it, close enough for breath to meet cold rock, close enough for colour to pass around fingers or across skin. Some ancient hands were made by pressing pigment directly onto the wall. Others were made by placing the hand against stone and blowing or spraying colour around it, so that the hand itself vanished and only its outline remained. In both cases, the image is not an animal seen at a distance. It is the human body leaving its own border behind. That makes these marks different from many other traces of early life. A tool can show skill, a hearth can show fire, a bone can show food, death, or survival, but a hand mark carries presence in a very direct way. It brings us back to the beginning of human evidence, when people did not yet write personal histories, but still marked the world with parts of themselves. The hand was not only a symbol, it was the working instrument of human life. It held stone, it carried wood, it shaped pigment, it lifted children, it felt textures in darkness, it learned by repetition, it remembered through movement. When a hand appears on a cave wall, it quietly joins biology and memory. The same kind of hand that made tools also made images. The same fingers that gripped, cut, scraped, and gathered also paused long enough to become a mark. This is why the oldest hand stencils can feel so near to us. The distance in years is enormous, but the shape is familiar. We know the spread of fingers. We know the soft space between them. We know the difference between palm and wrist. Even without knowing the person, we recognize the human outline because we carry a related body. That recognition should not make us careless. We cannot say with certainty what each hand meant to the person who made it. It may have been personal, social, playful, serious, repeated, taught, remembered, or connected to practices we no longer understand. Different caves, different times, and different groups may not have shared one single meaning. What we can say more safely is that these marks show intentional contact between body, pigment, stone, and place. They were not accidental scratches. They were made by people who understood that a surface could hold a trace after the body moved away. In a world before writing, this mattered. Human knowledge began in bodies before it became fixed in signs. A person learned the world through skin, balance, pressure, warmth, pain, and touch. The hand was one of the first bridges between thought and material. It turned intention into action. It made memory visible by repeating movements until they became skill. So when a hand remains on stone for a length of time far beyond one human life, it becomes more than an outline. It becomes evidence that early humans were already living with a sense of presence that could outlast the moment. The hand does not tell us, "I was important." It simply remains. It lets modern people stand before a body that is gone and still feel the closeness of that body. This closeness is part of the strange power of cave art. The animals may show attention to the living world outside, but the hands show the makers themselves entering the record. They do not solve the mystery. They deepen it, because they remind us that the first human images were not only about what people saw, they were also about the fact that someone was there. A hand on stone is simple only at first glance. It is the outline of skin, bone, finger, palm, and wrist, but it also carries a deeper connection between the living body and remembered experience. Before a person can leave such a mark, the body must understand distance, pressure, surface, breath, and control. The hand must stay still while colour moves around it, or move with enough care to press pigment against rock. This small act brings together many older human abilities. It depends on touch. It depends on sight. It depends on the brain's power to imagine a trace before the trace appears. The result is quiet, but the process is not empty. It shows a body making itself visible through a controlled gesture. In that way, the hand mark belongs close to the earliest roots of human knowledge. Long before written memory, the hand was how thought entered the material world. It struck stone into shape. It carried embers. It prepared hides. It gathered plants. It pointed toward danger or food. It held another hand in childhood: fear, learning, or care. The body did not think only inside the skull. It thought through action, through touch, through repeated movements that became skill. A hand stencil on a cave wall preserves a little of that embodied mind. It does not explain what the maker believed, but it shows that the maker understood a powerful fact. A body can pass away from a place and still leave a sign of having been there. This is one reason the hand feels different from an animal drawing. An animal image asks us to think about observation, hunting, fear, landscape, and memory. A hand image asks us to think about presence. It narrows the distance between viewer and maker. The modern viewer may not know the ancient language, the social group, the season, the sound in the cave, or the reason for the gesture, but the human shape is still readable. Our own fingers answer it silently. We recognize not a message, but a shared structure of being alive. This does not mean the meaning is obvious. A hand could have been made by an adult, or, in some cases, by a younger person. It could have belonged to a repeated practice, a group activity, a personal mark, a learning moment, or something connected to beliefs that cannot now be recovered with certainty. The responsible answer is not to force one meaning onto every hand. The safer truth is that hands show contact, intention, and bodily memory. They show that people did not only look at the cave wall, they entered into relation with it through touch. In the deep beginning of human life, touch was one of the first ways the world became known. The ground told of weight, stone told of hardness, skin told of cold, heat, pain, and closeness. A child learned the world by handling it before learning any formal explanation of it. The cave hand keeps that older way of knowing in view. It is not knowledge written as words. It is knowledge carried by the body and fixed for a while on stone. This may be one of the losses hidden inside modern life. We still use our hands constantly, but much of our knowledge now arrives through smooth surfaces, symbols, screens, and distant images. The ancient hand mark comes from a world where surfaces were uneven, resistant, cold, wet, sharp, or alive. To know something often meant to touch it, carry it, track it, shape it, or be marked by it. When pigment surrounded a hand in the darkness, the body became both the maker and the missing shape. What remains is an absence made visible. The hand itself is gone, but the space it occupied still holds. That quiet outline reminds us that human memory did not begin as writing. It began as living bodies learning how to leave traces. A stone tool can be studied, measured, and understood through the marks of use left on its edge. But a hand on a cave wall reaches us in a different way. A tool tells us that someone knew how to strike stone, choose material, make an edge, and use that edge for survival. It speaks about skill, but the person remains partly hidden behind the function. A hand mark is quieter, yet it feels closer, because it preserves the border of the body itself. It does not show a face. It does not give a name. It does not explain why the person entered the cave. Still, it places a human presence directly against stone. The viewer does not need a translation to understand that fingers once opened there, that a palm once touched or hovered near the wall, that breath and skin were close to cold rock. This is why such a simple mark can move the modern mind more deeply than a sharpened blade. The blade shows what humans could make. The hand shows that someone was there. At the beginning of human history, before writing and before monuments, most lives passed without leaving names behind. People were remembered by those who knew them, then by stories, habits, places, and repeated skills. Archaeology often finds what lasted by accident: stone, bone, mineral color, charcoal, hardened ground. A hand mark belongs to that fragile bridge between a living moment and deep time. It was not made to fit a museum category. It was made through the body, using the body's own shape as the edge between color and stone. When pigment was pressed or blown around the fingers, the hand became both the maker and the missing form. What remains is an outline of absence. The hand is gone, but the space it occupied is still visible. That is a powerful human fact, not because it solves the meaning of the image, but because it reminds us that presence can survive without speech. A stone tool may have passed from one person to another. It may have been carried, repaired, dropped, reused, or left behind after its usefulness ended. A hand stencil feels more personal because it is tied to one body at one moment. Even when we cannot know whether the maker was young or old, alone or accompanied, serious or playful, repeating a practice or making a rare gesture, the mark still holds a bodily nearness. Our own hands recognize it. The fingers of the ancient person are not symbols only. They are shapes that answer to our own anatomy. We can feel the spread of the palm without touching the wall. We can imagine the stillness required to hold the hand in place. This recognition brings the cave paintings back to the origin of human experience. Before humans built systems of written knowledge, the body was the first instrument of memory. Hands learned by doing. They remembered through repeated movement. They carried food, held tools, shaped fire, touched children, followed stone surfaces in darkness, and turned intention into action. When one of those hands became an image, it joined survival, memory, and identity without needing words. This does not mean every hand had the same meaning, or that we can safely claim one explanation for all of them. Different caves and different groups may have used such marks in different ways. Some meanings may be lost beyond recovery, but the closeness remains. The hand on stone is not grand like a temple or loud like a king's inscription. It is modest, almost silent, and for that reason it feels deeply human. It tells us that long before history learned to write names, a person could stand in darkness and leave behind the outline of being alive. The animals on the cave walls are not random decorations placed beside human hands. They are among the strongest reasons these paintings still feel as if they carry more knowledge than they should. Horses, bison, aurochs, deer, mammoths, lions, rhinoceroses, and other creatures appear in different ancient painted and engraved places, depending on region, period, and what the surrounding world made available to human attention. Some are shown with heavy bodies and lowered heads. Some seem to gather force in the shoulders. Some turn, run, stand, or overlap with other forms. The exact species and dates vary from cave to cave, and it would be careless to turn all of them into one story. But the repeated presence of animals tells us something important. The world early humans watched most closely was alive with other bodies. These were not background figures in a human drama. They were neighbours, dangers, food sources, competitors, signs of season, and presences that shaped movement across the land. To live near large animals was to live inside a constant education. A person had to notice the curve of a back, the angle of a head, the weight of a hoof, the direction of a herd, the difference between a living track and an old one. Long before writing, human attention was trained by the need to read life in motion. That training appears on stone with surprising calm. The animals are not drawn as childish guesses. Many are made with an economy of line that suggests close watching. A few strokes can give a body weight. A curve can hold the tension of a neck. A dark patch can gather the strength of a shoulder. A line along the belly can make the animal feel grounded, heavy, and real. This does not mean every image was meant to be naturalistic in the modern sense. Some are simplified, some are layered, some are distorted by the wall, and some may follow meanings we cannot recover. Yet even when they are not exact copies of nature, they often show that the makers knew animal form deeply. That knowledge came from a human beginning far older than museums or science. Homo sapiens survived by entering the rhythms of other species. Human bodies were not the strongest bodies on the landscape. We did not have the claws of large predators, the speed of many herd animals, or the protection of thick hide. Our strength depended on attention shared across a group, memory carried across time, and hands able to turn observation into action. The painted animals reflect that relationship. They belong to a world where seeing was tied to hunger, caution, planning, and respect for forces larger than the individual. Looking at a painted bison or horse today, we may be tempted to ask what it meant. That question is natural, but it should come after a simpler one. What did it require to see the animal well enough to remember it in darkness? The painter did not have the animal standing calmly before the wall. The image had to be carried inward by memory. It had to survive the walk into the cave, the preparation of pigment, the uncertain movement of firelight, and the uneven surface of stone. This means the animal on the wall is already a transformation. It is not the living creature itself. It is an animal remembered by a human mind and remade by a human hand. That is where the quiet power lies. The cave wall holds a meeting between the outside world and the inner life of the observer. In that meeting, the animal becomes more than evidence of prey or landscape. It becomes evidence that early humans were not merely reacting to the world. They were holding images within themselves, carrying them across space, and giving them a second life on stone. The paintings seem to know too much because they show animals not as flat objects, but as beings understood through long attention. They preserve a kind of knowledge that came before written description, the knowledge of bodies watched carefully enough to remain after they had disappeared from sight. To understand the animals on these walls, we have to look not only at what was painted, but at how carefully movement was remembered. A living horse does not stand forever in the same position. A bison turns its head, shifts its weight, lowers its horns, breathes, walks, stops, and disappears behind other bodies. A deer can be seen clearly for only a moment before trees, distance, or light change the scene. The people who painted these animals did not have the frozen stillness of photographs. They carried the animal inside memory. This makes the accuracy of many forms important. It was not accuracy in the modern scientific sense with measurements, labels, and diagrams. It was the accuracy of recognition, the line that makes a back feel heavy, the curve that tells the eye this is a horse and not a deer, the lowered head that gives a bison its force, the lifted leg that suggests motion even when nothing moves. Such attention belonged to a way of life in which animal bodies mattered every day. Early humans had to know more than the name of a creature. They had to read posture, direction, speed, grouping, danger, age, weakness, and season. A herd seen far away was not just a herd. It was information spread across the land. A change in movement could matter. A scattered group might signal fear. A track could tell whether an animal passed recently or long before. The human eye was trained by need, but need alone does not fully explain the paintings. Survival can teach a person to notice, but the cave wall shows that noticing could also be carried inward and reshaped. The makers were not simply copying the world, they were selecting from it. They left out many things and emphasized others. In some images, the body of the animal is stronger than the ground beneath it. In others, the head or shoulder receives special weight. Sometimes animals overlap, and sometimes the wall's own shape becomes part of the body. These choices show that seeing was not passive. The mind organized what the eye had learned. This returns us to the beginning of human thought. Homo sapiens did not become human only by making tools. Our species also became human by holding absent things in memory. An animal no longer present could still be pictured. A movement already finished could still be suggested. A body seen outside in daylight could be remade inside the cave under firelight. That is a profound capacity, but it does not require us to invent impossible explanations. It rests on abilities still familiar: memory, attention, hand control, shared learning, and imagination. What may feel strange to us is the depth of observation. Many modern people see animals mostly through screens, books, farms, or roads. The prehistoric painter lived with animals as active forces in the same world. Their bodies shaped human roots, risks, food, stories, and fears. To watch them closely was not a hobby, it was part of being awake. The paintings may preserve that waking attention. A few lines of pigment can hold not only the look of an animal, but also the long practice of watching animals under pressure. This is why the cave creatures feel alive even when they are still. They were drawn by minds that had seen weight before drawing weight, had seen motion before drawing motion, had seen danger before giving a horn its angle or a shoulder its mass. We should not claim that every painted animal had the same purpose, or that every detail was meant to record behavior. Some may have carried meanings lost. Some may have belonged to repeated practices within groups, but the skill remains. The wall shows that early humans had learned to make stillness, remember movement, and that is one of the reasons these images seem to know more than stone should know. The animal images on cave walls tell us something about more than art. They point toward a form of attention that belonged to daily life before writing, farming, and settled towns changed the human relationship with the land. To remember an animal clearly, a person had to notice it again and again under real conditions. Not in a classroom, not in a picture book, not from a safe distance chosen for comfort. The animal appeared in cold air, broken light, open ground, forest edge, river crossing, or deep shadow. It moved with other animals. It left tracks. It made sound. It carried danger, food, warning, and season within the same body. The painter who later shaped that animal on stone may not have been trying to record facts in the way modern people do, but the image still preserves the result of close living. It shows that human memory was trained by dependence. A group that lived by hunting, gathering, tracking, avoiding predators, and following seasonal resources could not afford to see the living world vaguely. The body of a horse, the mass of a bison, the antlers of a deer, or the heavy outline of a mammoth was part of a larger field of knowledge. It connected weather, movement, landscape, hunger, risk, and shared experience. This is where the paintings return us to the early starting point of human life. Homo sapiens began as a species whose intelligence was not separate from the environment. The brain did not work alone, sealed away from the land. It worked with the feet that crossed ground, the hands that touched stone and hide, the eyes that followed motion, and the ears that listened in darkness. Memory was not only a private inner storage, it was useful because it helped people act later. A remembered trail could lead back to water. A remembered season could prepare a group for change. A remembered animal posture could warn of danger or opportunity. When such memory entered cave art, it did not become a written lesson, but it became visible. The painted animal is a trace of the mind holding the world after the world has moved on. That is why these images matter so deeply to the question of cave paintings that seem to know too much. They are not evidence that ancient people possessed impossible information. They are evidence that they possess necessary information, gathered through a kind of closeness that many modern lives no longer require. Today, we often know animals through names, categories, documentaries, warnings, or symbols. Early humans knew them through repeated presence. A person might not need a scientific vocabulary to recognize the difference between strength and weakness in a moving body, or between calm and alarm in a herd. Such knowledge could be practical, but it could also become emotional and memorable. An animal that fed people could also frighten them. An animal followed across distance could become familiar without becoming tame. An animal painted in a cave could carry many layers at once: observation, need, danger, memory, and perhaps meanings we cannot responsibly claim to know. This layered quality helps explain why the paintings still feel alive. They do not reduce animals to objects, they hold them as presences. The animals are seen with enough care that the viewer senses a long relationship behind the line, but we must keep the mystery honest. We cannot say exactly what every painted horse or bison meant to its makers. We cannot know which stories were told beside them, which gestures accompanied them, or whether silence surrounded them. What we can say is that their making required attention strong enough to survive absence. The animal had vanished from sight, yet its form remained in memory. The hand entered the dark. The wall received the image. And across thousands of years we meet not only the painted creature, but the human habit of watching life closely enough to remember it. It is tempting to look at an ancient cave painting and call the maker a genius, as if the safest way to respect early humans is to make them sound extraordinary in a modern way. But that is not necessary, and it may even lead us away from the quieter truth. The people who painted deep inside caves were human beings, not unfinished versions of us and not magical beings with secret knowledge beyond evidence. They belong to Homo sapiens, a species with a long evolutionary history of seeing, remembering, cooperating, making tools, learning from others, and shaping materials with the hand. Their intelligence did not need cities to become real. It did not need writing to become complex. It grew from the demands of living in a world where survival depended on attention, memory, and shared knowledge. When we look at the animals, hands, and marks on cave walls, we are seeing one expression of that human capacity. The painting is not proof that prehistoric people thought exactly as we do. It is not proof that they had the same beliefs or the same categories. But it is strong evidence that their minds could hold images, plan actions, control movement, and work with surfaces in ways that were far from simple. Before a line appeared on stone, something had already happened inside the mind and body. A person had seen forms in the world, remembered them, chosen a surface, prepared colour, carried light, and controlled the movement of the hand. None of these steps requires supernatural explanation. Each one belongs to ordinary human abilities, but joined together, they become remarkable. This is how we should approach the brain behind the painting, with respect, but without exaggeration. The early human mind was not a blank space suddenly illuminated by art. It was already shaped by generations of life in changing environments. The beginning of human thought was practical, social, and sensory. A person learned by watching others break stone, by hearing warnings, by recognizing tracks, by remembering where water had been found, by knowing which bodies in the dark were safe and which were not. The brain grew useful through relation. It connected sight to movement, memory to action, fear to caution, and imagination to planning. Cave art stands at the meeting of these capacities. It shows that early humans could do more than react to what stood before them. They could bring an absent image into the present. They could make a wall carry something that was not physically there. That is a central feature of symbolic life, though we should use the word carefully. A symbol does not have to be a written sign with a fixed meaning. It can be a mark that holds attention beyond the immediate moment. A painted animal may have carried meanings now lost, but even at the most cautious level, it shows that a remembered form could be made visible for others or for repeated viewing. This matters because it places cave painting within the wider story of human cognition. The same species that learn to shape tools also learn to shape memory outside the body. The same hand that made a sharp edge could make a curved back. The same eye that followed living animals could guide pigment along stone. The same social mind that passed knowledge across generations could also pass ways of seeing, marking, and returning to certain places. We do not need to call this a sudden miracle. It may be better to see it as a deep human continuity. The cave wall did not create the mind. It received what the mind and body had already learned. And what it received was not primitive confusion, but focused attention made durable by colour, stone, and time. That is why these paintings still feel unsettling. They show us that the human mind was already ancient before history began to write itself down. A cave painting begins in the eye, but it cannot be completed by the eye alone. Before the first line reaches stone, the image must pass through memory, imagination, and the controlled movement of the hand. This connection between seeing, remembering, and doing is one of the most important things these old images reveal about the human brain. A living animal appears briefly. It turns, lowers its head, crosses behind another body, or vanishes into distance. The painter does not bring the animal into the cave. The painter brings an inner image. That inner image is not a perfect photograph. It is shaped by repeated seeing, by the body's memory of motion, by what mattered most in the animal's form. The heavy shoulder, the curve of the back, the narrow legs, the lifted head, the pressure of movement, these are not only visual details. They are remembered relations between parts of a living body. To place them on stone, the mind has to hold the absent animal steady while the hand moves through darkness and uneven surface. This tells us something quiet but deep about early Homo sapiens. Their brains were not only reacting to the present, they could carry what was no longer visible and make it appear again. That ability sits near the beginning of human symbolic life. It is also closely tied to survival. A person who could remember the shape of a track, the movement of a herd, the look of a storm, or the path back to shelter, had a practical advantage. Memory was not separate from life. It guided the body through the world. In the cave, that same memory took another form. It became image. The coordination required was also physical. The hand had to follow intention with enough control to make a line, spread pigment, shade a body, or work with the natural shape of rock. The wall was not smooth and the light was not steady. Firelight may have shifted across the surface, making some ridges more visible and hiding others. The painter had to adjust, pause, reach, and continue. This is not a small thing. It shows the partnership between brain and body that lies at the root of human making. The human hand is able to grip, press, tap, smear, scrape, point, and trace. The brain guides these actions, but the hand also teaches the brain through touch and repetition. Skill is not only an idea, it is memory built into movement. A person who learned to shape stone or prepare pigment also learned timing, pressure, and patience. Those same qualities could enter a painted animal or a hand stencil. Imagination was part of this, but imagination should not be misunderstood as fantasy detached from reality. In early human life, imagination was often practical. It allowed a person to picture a route before walking it, anticipate an animal's movement, remember a place not currently seen, or prepare for danger before danger arrived. Cave art shows imagination working with memory and observation, not against them. The animal on the wall is both real and not real. It is not breathing, but it comes from a breathing world. It is not moving, but its lines may suggest movement. It is not present, yet it remains visible. This ability to hold absence in a visible form is one reason the paintings feel so advanced without needing any false claim. They show that early humans could let the mind step beyond the immediate moment. That is close to the origin of many later human abilities. Storytelling, planning, teaching, remembering the dead, marking places, and sharing meanings. We cannot know the exact thought behind each image. We should not pretend to hear the painter's private mind, but the coordination itself remains on the wall. Eye, memory, imagination, hand, pigment, and stone came together in a controlled act. Across deep time, that act tells us that the human brain had already learned how to keep the unseen close. The most important thing about a cave painting may be that it allows something absent to remain present. The animal is not there, the hand is gone. The person who made the mark has disappeared beyond any name we could recover. Yet the image still holds a trace of them all. This is not a small mental step. To make an image, a human mind must separate a thing from the immediate moment and hold it in another form. A horse seen outside can become a horse remembered inside. A body that moved across cold ground can become a curve of pigment on stone. A hand that touched the wall can leave only its border, while the living skin withdraws. In each case, the visible mark stands for something no longer physically present. This capacity does not require writing, but it belongs to the same deep human path that later made writing possible. It shows that early Homo sapiens could keep the world close after the world had changed. Before cities and written records, this ability mattered in daily life. A person had to remember where animals crossed a valley, where water might return after a season, where danger had appeared, where a group had camped, and which signs in the landscape belonged to recent movement. Human survival depended on carrying absent places, absent animals, and past events inside memory. The cave wall gave that inner holding a material form. It did not turn memory into language as we know it, but it made memory visible enough to be shared, revisited, and perhaps taught. This is why cave art belongs so closely to the origin of human symbolic behavior. A symbol is not always a letter or a formal sign. It can be a visible thing that points beyond itself. A painted bison is pigment and stone, but it also calls the mind toward the living animal, toward the remembered encounter, toward the knowledge of weight, danger, and movement. A hand stencil is empty space surrounded by colour, but it calls the mind toward the body that once blocked the pigment. The mark is simple, yet it opens a space between what is seen and what is meant. We should be careful here. We cannot say exactly what every image meant to its makers. We cannot turn each animal into a fixed message, each hand into one universal signal, or each cave into one known ceremony. The honest evidence does not allow that, but the existence of the images still tells us something strong. These people were not limited to the immediate surface of experience. They could preserve appearances, repeat forms, work with remembered bodies, and create marks that remained after the action ended. That is already a profound change in the relationship between mind and time. The human brain was no longer only responding to a moving world. It could hold parts of that world still, not by stopping life, but by remaking it in another medium. This may be one reason the paintings seem to know too much. They stand at the place where biological perception becomes durable memory. Eyes that evolved to follow movement now help create still forms. Hands that evolved for grasping and making now shaped images. A social mind that depended on learning from others could return to a wall and encounter what another person had left behind. In that sense, the cave wall became a quiet extension of human memory. It did not replace speech, gesture, or lived experience. It added another way for attention to survive. When we look at these images now, we are not only looking at ancient animals or ancient hands, we are looking at one of the earliest surviving signs that human beings had learned to carry absence into presence. They could see something, lose sight of it, remember it, and let stone hold it longer than the body could. To understand why the cave paintings feel so strangely alert, we have to remember how close early humans lived to things that modern life often keeps at a distance. The people who made these images did not step outside into a world designed for comfort, with fixed lights, straight roads, sealed rooms, and information arriving safely through screens. They lived in a world where weather touched the skin directly, where darkness changed what the body could do, where animal movement mattered, and where a mistake in reading the land could have real consequences. The ground was not scenery, it was information. Mud, frost, dust, broken grass, scattered bone, smell, sound, and silence could all carry meaning. A person who learned these signs was not being poetic. They were learning how to remain alive with others. This closeness shaped attention. The eye had to notice small differences. The ear had to separate ordinary noise from warning. The body had to feel cold, fatigue, hunger, fear, and patience without turning them into abstract ideas. In such a world, animals were not distant subjects of curiosity. They were powerful presences sharing the same space. Some could be hunted, some could injure. Some could lead people toward water, season, migration, or danger. The relationship was practical, but it was also repeated, intimate, and unforgettable. When people painted animals deep in caves, they were not inventing importance from nothing. They were drawing from a life already shaped by those bodies. This is where the idea of evolutionary loss becomes quiet but important. Modern humans have not lost the same brain. We still carry ancient capacities for attention, memory, fear, pattern recognition, and bodily awareness. But many of those capacities no longer receive the same daily training. A person today may know the names of many animals yet never need to read a hoofprint in wet ground. We may understand weather forecasts yet rarely learn the sky through long exposure. We may fear darkness in a room, but not depend on firelight to move through a cave. The old world trained perception through necessity. The modern world often protects us from that necessity. This does not make modern people weaker or ancient people superior. It simply changes what the mind practices every day. Human ability grows around use. A hand that works stone learns one kind of pressure. A hand that touches glass learns another. An eye that follows living herds across open land becomes sensitive to forms of motion that an eye trained by screens may not need. A body that sleeps near cold, animals, and uncertain weather learns the night differently from a body inside walls. The cave paintings may preserve traces of a practiced attention that has become rare, not because evolution erased it completely, but because daily life no longer calls it forth in the same way. This links directly to the beginning of human life. Homo sapiens emerged as a species within ecosystems, not above them. Our intelligence grew in relation to landscape, other animals, social learning, and repeated bodily experience. To be human was not only to think, it was to notice well enough to move, wait, avoid, remember, and return. The cave wall holds a memory of that older training. Its animals seem alive because they were made by people for whom animal life was not background. Its marks feel deliberate because the act of seeing itself had been sharpened by the world. We should not romanticize this closeness. It could involve hardship, danger, cold, hunger, and loss, but neither should we treat it as simple. A difficult life can produce deep attention. The paintings may feel as if they know too much because they come from minds and bodies still living near the sources of human perception. They remind us that before history became written knowledge, much of what humans knew came through direct contact with earth, darkness, weather, animal movement, and the fragile discipline of watching carefully. Modern life has not erased the old human senses, but it has changed the work they are asked to do. The eye still searches for pattern. The ear still reacts to sudden sound. The body still tightens in darkness before the mind can explain why. Yet most of us no longer spend each day reading ground, wind, animal movement, and seasonal change as if our safety depended on it. We move through rooms built to stay dry. We follow roads made to remove uncertainty. We check time by clocks, weather by forecasts, direction by maps, and memory by devices outside the body. These tools are not mistakes. They are part of the long human story of protection, cooperation, and invention. But every protection also changes what must be practiced. A person who no longer needs to recognize tracks will slowly lose the habit of seeing tracks. A person who no longer waits for animal movement at the edge of light may lose patience for that kind of watching. A person surrounded by constant artificial light may still fear darkness, but may not know darkness as a layered space full of temperature, echo, smell, and distance. This is the quiet loss that the cave paintings can make visible. They do not prove that ancient people were better than us. They suggest that their attention was trained by a world that demanded more direct reading. The beginning of human intelligence was not separated from landscape. Homo sapiens learned through bodies moving under open sky, through hands testing surfaces, through groups remembering where danger had been and where food might return. Modern life often moves knowledge away from immediate contact. We know more in total, but we may touch less of what we know. We can name animals we have never followed. We can watch a storm without feeling its cold arrive through the skin. We can see a cave painting in a bright museum book without smelling damp stone or needing fire to see the wall. This change can make old images feel impossible, as if they came from minds with hidden knowledge. More likely, they came from minds with practiced closeness. The painter who remembered a bison's shoulder or a horse's turn had probably lived in a world where such details were not decorative. They were part of daily orientation, the land taught by repeating itself, but never in exactly the same way. A season returned yet brought different weather. Herds moved, but not always along the same path. Darkness came every night, but each night could hold different sounds. To live well, people had to notice both pattern and difference. Many modern environments reduce that demand. They make life safer, smoother, and more predictable, which is a human achievement, but they also soften certain forms of attention. The mind becomes skilled at reading written signs, digital symbols, schedules, and distant images, while older skills of ground, weather, and animal reading may rest unused. Nothing in the brain disappears in a single generation, yet habits can become faint when a life no longer asks for them. The cave paintings stand on the far side of that change. Their lines are not merely old. They come from a relationship with the world in which perception was continually exercised by need. This is why we should be careful when we call them mysterious. Some of the mystery may not belong to the painters at all. It may belong to us. We are looking backward from a life that has moved away from many direct signals of earth, animal, weather, and night. The paintings seem to know too much because they preserve a kind of seeing that once helped make human life possible, and that now appears strange because it is no longer ordinary. The cave paintings do not have to be treated as impossible messages in order to feel profound. Their power may come from something more ordinary and more difficult to recover, a way of paying attention that once belonged to daily human life. When we say they seem to know too much, we may really be noticing that they know the animal body, the stone surface, the dark space, and the lasting force of a mark in ways that modern people often meet only from a distance. A painted horse does not need to hide a secret code to disturb us. It is already strange enough that someone without writing, without metal tools, without cities, and without the later institutions of art could carry a living form into darkness and make it remain. A hand stencil does not need to prove a single ritual to move us. It is enough that a human body once used its own shape to create an absence that still speaks of presence. If we make the paintings too mysterious, we may cover the very thing that makes them human. They come from a world where attention was not optional. The land had to be read, the weather had to be felt before it became dangerous. The movement of animals had to be remembered. The sound inside a cave had to be understood by the body, not explained by instruments. This kind of knowledge was not written down, but it was not vague. It lived in repeated acts: walking, watching, waiting, tracking, teaching, touching, remembering. In the beginning of human life, Homo sapiens did not stand apart from the environment as a distant observer. The human mind grew inside relationship. It learned from ground, fire, hunger, darkness, animal bodies, other people, and the long discipline of surviving together. The cave paintings may be one of the rare places where that relationship became visible enough to last. They do not give us the full world that made them. They give us fragments: pigment, outline, animal form, hand shape, wall surface, placement, and silence. Yet those fragments are enough to suggest a kind of attention that had been sharpened by closeness. Modern life often makes knowledge broader but less direct. We can know about many landscapes without standing in them. We can see animals from countries we will never visit. We can study images of caves without entering darkness. These are real gains, and they should not be dismissed. But they can also make older forms of perception seem almost foreign. A person trained by screens may find it hard to imagine a mind trained by tracks. A person protected from night may find it hard to imagine darkness as a space full of layered information. A person who rarely needs to touch raw stone, hide, ash, or earth may forget how much thinking can happen through the hand. The paintings stand quietly against this forgetfulness. They remind us that ancient attention was not primitive simply because it was not written. It was local, bodily, patient, and practiced. It may have noticed things we now overlook, not because ancient people were more evolved, but because their lives demanded different forms of awareness. This is the true loss suggested by the cave walls. Not the loss of intelligence, and not the loss of humanity, but the fading of certain habits of seeing. The old images may feel like riddles, because we no longer share the full training of the people who made them. We see the result, but not the daily discipline behind it. We see the animal, but not every hour spent watching animals. We see the hand, but not the lifetime of touch that made the gesture meaningful. The paintings do not have to be supernatural to know too much. They only have to preserve a human way of seeing that has become rare. A cave is easy to misunderstand if we imagine it as an ancient gallery, a place where people simply went to look at pictures in the way modern visitors look at paintings on a wall. That comparison is useful only for a moment, and then it begins to fail. Many decorated caves were not convenient spaces for ordinary life. Some images were placed in chambers that were difficult to reach, in passages where movement was narrow, or in areas where natural light could not enter. To get there, people needed light, usually from fire. They needed to carry materials, protect the flame, watch their footing, and move through a space where the body could not relax in the same way it might outside. The cave was not a room designed for display. It was a physical environment with darkness, echo, dampness, uneven ground, and walls that changed shape as the light moved. This matters because the place itself shaped the act of painting. A flat modern wall asks the viewer to focus on the image alone. A cave wall does something else. It bends, swells, cracks, narrows, and recedes. Its natural surface may suggest the back of an animal, the roundness of a belly, or the edge of a head. Firelight can make these forms appear and disappear. A line may be visible from one angle and faint from another, An animal painted on such a wall may not have been experienced as a fixed picture under steady light. It may have changed as people moved, as flames shifted, as shadows crossed the stone. We should not exaggerate this into certainty about ritual, belief, or ceremony. The honest evidence does not let us say exactly what every image was for, but we can say that many cave paintings belong to spaces very different from everyday open ground. That difference is part of their meaning, even when the exact purpose remains unknown. At the beginning of human life, places were not neutral containers. A river crossing, a sheltered overhang, a hunting path, a hill, a fire site, and a deep cave each asked different things of the body and mind. Homo sapiens learned the world through movement across such places. The cave asked for slowness. It reduced vision. It amplified sound. It made the body aware of breath, balance, and closeness. To enter a decorated chamber was not the same as passing a mark on an exposed rock outside. It required separation from the ordinary surface of life. This may help explain why the images can feel so heavy with intention. They were not always placed where they would be casually seen by everyone at any time. Some seem to belong to hidden or protected zones, though we must remember that survival conditions also affect what archaeology preserves. Paintings in deep caves may last longer than images made in open air, so the surviving record may not represent everything people once created. Still, the pattern is enough to make us cautious about calling these caves simple picture rooms. They were not merely decorated shelters. In many cases, they were places people entered with effort, light, and purpose. The wall, the darkness, the path inward, and the image formed one experience. A painted animal, deep in stone, was not separated from the echo around it or the flame that revealed it. A handmark was not only a shape, but a gesture made in a place where the body felt the cave pressing close. This is why the old images seem to know more than ordinary drawings. They belong to an environment that changed seeing itself. The cave did not just preserve the paintings, it helped create the way they were made, seen, and remembered. Firelight changes a cave wall in a way that daylight cannot. In open daylight, the eye can move across a surface with confidence. Edges are clearer. Distance is easier to judge. A mark stays more stable because the light around it is steady. Inside a cave, light is smaller, warmer, less certain. It comes from a flame that must be carried and protected. It trembles with air movement and with the hand that holds it. As the flame shifts, the wall seems to shift with it. A hollow deepens, then softens. A ridge appears, then falls back into shadow. A crack can become a boundary. A swelling of stone can suddenly look like muscle, shoulder, belly, or head. This does not mean the wall was alive, and it does not mean we should turn every flicker of light into a grand claim about ancient belief. It simply means that the images were not made or seen under neutral conditions. The cave, the flame, and the human body work together to shape perception. A person standing before a painted animal may have seen it differently from one step to the next. The line of a back could seem still from one angle, then gather movement when light slid along the stone. A horn or leg could appear stronger as shadow touched it. An animal painted over a natural curve may have gained weight from the rock itself. The image was pigment, but it was also surface, darkness, angle, and time. This is important for the central question, because cave paintings seem to know too much, partly because they use more than drawing alone. They use the conditions of seeing. At the beginning of human life, people learned the world through unstable light long before they lived under fixed lamps. Fire was not only warmth, it was a moving source of visibility, a small circle of human control inside night. Around fire, faces changed, tools gleamed, smoke moved, and darkness remained just beyond reach. Inside caves, this experience became more concentrated. The flame did not conquer the cave. It revealed small pieces of it, one after another. The painter had to work within that narrow field. The viewer, if others viewed the image, also had to meet it through partial light. This may have made the painted forms feel less like flat objects and more like presences emerging from stone. We should keep that word gentle. Presence does not prove a single meaning. It describes the way a body can feel something before it explains it. A large animal shape, seen by flame in a dark chamber, could affect the senses differently from the same image seen on a bright page today. The sound of movement, the smell of smoke, the cold wall, and the closeness of the cave all belong to the experience. The hand that painted was not separated from the hand that held light, mixed pigment, touched stone, and balanced on uneven ground. The human brain was coordinating all of this. Vision, memory, body position, fear, patience, and controlled action. That coordination gives the images part of their force. They were not simply placed in darkness. They were made through darkness. They did not merely survive on stone, they worked with stone. The natural wall was not a blank surface waiting politely for art. It had its own form, and early humans seem to have noticed that form with care. A curved wall could invite a curved body. A hollow could deepen a chest or flank. A rough patch could gather darkness where colour alone might not. The result is not modern realism, but a meeting between remembered animal and physical cave. When we see these images now, under museum lighting or in photographs, we may lose some of that original instability. We see the mark, but not always the flame that made it change. We see the animal, but not the slow reveal of its shape from darkness. The paintings seem to know too much because they were made by people who understood, through experience, that seeing is not only about the eye. It is about light, surface, movement, body, and memory becoming one quiet act. It is natural to wonder whether deep cave paintings were connected to ritual, teaching, memory, hunting practices, stories, or experiences that modern people can no longer reconstruct. The setting invites such questions. The darkness, the effort required to enter, the use of fire, the careful placement of images, and the repeated attention to animals all suggest that these were not casual marks made without thought. But suggestion is not the same as proof. This is where the story must slow down and stay honest. The cave does not give us a full sentence. It gives us pigment, surface, position, traces of movement, and sometimes nearby archaeological evidence. From these traces, we can say that people made deliberate images in particular places. We can say that some caves were entered with preparation. We can say that the natural form of the wall mattered in many cases. We can say that animals, hands, signs, and marks appear in patterns that deserve careful study. But we cannot safely say, for every image, exactly what the painter believed, what words were spoken, what emotions were felt, or what purpose the group assigned to the act. To claim too much would make the paintings smaller, not larger, because it would replace their real silence with our own invention. The honest mystery is stronger than a false answer. At the beginning of human history, before writing, meaning moved through speech, gesture, memory, shared action, and repeated places. Some of that meaning may have left marks on stone, but much of it left no permanent trace. A voice in a cave would vanish. A story told by fire would vanish unless it was told again. A gesture made beside a painted wall would vanish. A rule, fear, lesson, or memory might survive for generations inside a group and still leave nothing clear enough for us to translate. This is why caution is not weakness. It is respect for the distance between evidence and imagination. If we call every deep cave image a ritual object, we may be partly right in some cases and wrong in others. If we call every animal a hunting charm, we may simplify a much wider human relationship with the living world. If we call every hand a signature, we may impose a modern idea of identity onto people who may have understood the mark differently. The safer path is to describe what the evidence allows, then leave room for what it cannot say. This does not make the paintings less meaningful. It makes them more human. Human life is rarely built around one purpose alone. A place can teach, remember, gather, frighten, comfort, and connect without fitting neatly into one modern category. A painted animal could have been part of observation, memory, social practice, repeated tradition, or belief. And these possibilities do not have to exclude one another. Early Homo sapiens lived in groups where knowledge was shared through doing. A younger person may have learned by watching older hands prepare colour, hold light, or choose a wall. A skilled observer may have carried animal forms from the outside world into the cave. A group may have returned to certain places because earlier marks already made those places important. Yet each of these statements must remain careful. They are possibilities grounded in human behaviour, not certainties carved into the stone. The cave paintings seem to know too much, partly because they stand at the edge of what can be known. They show intention without explanation. They show skill without biography. They show place without a surviving map of meaning. That edge is valuable. It reminds us that the past is not an empty space waiting for modern fantasy, and it is not a closed book that science has already finished reading. It is a field of traces, some clear, some fragile, some permanently quiet. To stay with that quiet is not to give up. It is to look more carefully. The cave was not a simple gallery, but neither is it a message we can fully decode. It remains a human place where evidence and absence meet. Before people wrote knowledge into books, they carried it through living practice. A child did not learn the world by reading a list of rules. A child learned by watching where adults walked, how they listened, how they touched stone, how they prepared tools, how they waited near animal paths, how they reacted to weather, and how they remembered places after leaving them. In a world without writing, memory had to remain active inside the group. It moved through voices, gestures, songs perhaps, repeated tasks, shared routes, and familiar signs in the land. Much of it would have disappeared without leaving anything we can study. A spoken warning vanishes when the air becomes still. A lesson about a river crossing vanishes unless someone repeats it. A story told beside fire leaves no permanent shape unless it becomes attached to a place, an object, or a repeated action. This is why cave paintings matter so deeply. They are not writing in the modern sense, and we should not force them to behave like written language. But they show that early humans had found another way for memory to touch the outside world. A line of pigment could stay after the voice was gone. A hand stencil could hold the outline of a body after that body had left the cave. An animal form could remain visible after the living animal had vanished from sight. The painted wall did not preserve the whole memory, but it preserved enough to show that memory was being placed somewhere. This brings us back to the beginning of human life. Homo sapiens did not begin as isolated minds thinking alone. Our species became human through shared attention. People survived because knowledge could pass from one person to another: how to find food, how to avoid danger, how to make tools, how to recognize a season, how to move through darkness, how to treat a place as important. Before writing, the body was a library of learned movements, and the group was an archive of repeated memory. The cave wall may have joined that older archive. It could hold images that people returned to, added to, saw again, or remembered through. We cannot know exactly how often this happened, or what words were spoken, if any, around the images. But the existence of durable marks shows that some experiences were made to outlast the moment of making. This does not mean the paintings were simple records of events. They may not have been diaries, maps, lessons, or stories in any narrow modern sense. Their meaning may have been wider, quieter, and more tied to the practices of the people who made them. A painted animal could have gathered many kinds of memory at once: the look of a living body, the danger of approach, the patience of watching, the season of movement, the knowledge passed from older eyes to younger ones. A hand mark could have joined a person to a wall, a group to a place, or a moment to a longer chain of return, but these possibilities must remain careful. What we can say with more confidence is that human memory before writing was not weak because it was not written. It was carried differently. It lived in repetition. It lived in trained senses. It lived in the careful teaching of skills that had to be performed correctly, not merely described. The cave paintings stand as one of the rare surviving places where that unwritten memory became visible. They show us that before history had pages, people were already making the world remember. Not completely, not clearly enough for us to translate, but strongly enough for an image to survive beyond the life of its maker. This may be why the walls feel so aware. They are not speaking with words. They are holding what words once carried and time has mostly taken away. A painted wall could not preserve a whole way of life, but it could hold certain relations still enough for people to return to them. Before writing, human memory did not float freely. It attached itself to bodies, routes, animals, seasons, shelters, tools, and places where something had been seen or repeated. A group might remember where animals moved after cold months, where water stood after rain, where stone could be found, where danger had once appeared, or where older people had shown younger people how to watch. None of this required a written map. It required shared attention over time. In that world, An image of an animal on a cave wall may have done more than show the animal's shape. It may have gathered many experiences around one visible form. The animal was not only a body with legs, horns, hide, and breath. It belonged to a season, a landscape, a pattern of movement, a risk, a hunger, a teaching, and perhaps a story. We should not claim that each painted horse or bison had one fixed meaning. The safer point is that images can hold relations. They can help memory return to a web of things that are larger than the mark itself. This is especially important when we think about the early human starting point. Homo sapiens lived by connecting details. A track was not just a mark in mud. It connected ground, animal weight, direction, time, weather, and possible action. A herd was not just a group of bodies. It connected season, food, danger, and group planning. A cave was not just a hole in rock. It connected darkness, echo, protection, fear, return, and the strange durability of stone. The painted image stood inside this kind of connected world. It may have helped hold together what daily life forced people to know, that humans, animals, seasons, and places were not separate categories, but parts of one living system. Modern viewers often look for a message because written culture has trained us to search for statements. We ask what the painting says, but an unwritten image may not say in that way. It may gather. It may recall. It may make a place more memorable because something seen outside has been brought inside. It may allow a group to encounter an animal form again when the animal itself is absent. It may give younger eyes a shape to look at while older knowledge is spoken, shown, or silently understood. These are possibilities, not certainties, but they are grounded in how human memory works without writing. Memory becomes stronger when it is tied to image, gesture, place, repetition, and shared emotion. A cave wall could bring these together. The animal on stone could become a point around which attention returned. The hand near it could remind people that humans were part of the same place, not outside it. The wall itself could become a durable surface where time gathered slowly. This does not make cave painting a dictionary or a secret alphabet. It makes it something older than that, a visible anchor for relationships that mattered. The relationship between people and animals was practical but not narrow. Animals fed people, threatened them, taught caution, marked seasons, and filled imagination. The relationship between people and place was also deep. A route remembered by a group could become part of identity. A cave entered across generations could become heavy with earlier presence. A mark added to a wall could join the memory already there. When we look at such paintings now, much of the living context is gone. The voices have disappeared. The gestures have vanished. The seasons that gave meaning to certain movements have shifted beyond recovery, but the image remains as a quiet center. It tells us that early humans were already finding ways to hold their world together through forms that lasted longer than speech. The paintings seem to know too much because they stand where memory, animal life, season, and place once met in a single human act. It would be misleading to call cave painting a secret language, if by language we mean a system of words, grammar, and fixed meanings that can be translated in a stable way. A painted horse is not a sentence. A hand stencil is not a signature, unless evidence supports that in a particular case. A cluster of marks may invite comparison, but it does not automatically become an alphabet. The safest way to understand these images is not to force them into the shape of writing before writing. They belong to an older field of human expression, where image, place, gesture, memory, and shared practice could work together without becoming a written code. This makes them no less important. In some ways, it makes them more interesting, because they show how memory can be organized without the tools later civilizations relied on. Before people kept records on clay, bone, bark, paper, or stone inscriptions, they still had to remember. They still had to pass knowledge. They still had to make certain things matter beyond one moment. A cave wall could help do that, not by spelling out ideas, but by giving attention a durable place to return. The image did not have to say one thing in the way a written word says one thing inside a known language. It could gather many associations at once: animal presence, danger, skill, season, group memory, return, and the feeling of being human in a world full of other living bodies. This returns us again to the beginning of human symbolic life. Homo sapiens did not suddenly become thoughtful when writing appeared. The older mind already knew how to let one thing stand near another. A track could point to an animal no longer visible. Smoke could point to fire beyond a ridge. A broken branch could point to recent passage. A remembered place could point to water or danger before either was seen again. Human beings were already living among signs long before they invented formal scripts. Cave paintings may belong to that broader world of signs, but they are different from ordinary traces because they were made intentionally. The painter did not merely notice a track left by an animal. The painter created a mark that could call the mind towards something absent. That is why it is reasonable to think of cave art as a system of visual memory, if we use the phrase carefully. It was not a universal code. It was not the same everywhere. It may not have had fixed meanings shared across all groups or all centuries. But within a particular community, at a particular place, repeated images and marks may have helped people remember relations that mattered. A young person seeing an animal shape on the wall may have seen more than a drawing, because older knowledge could gather around it. A hand beside a figure may have meant something that depended on local practice, not on meanings we can recover now. A return to the same chamber may have carried memory that existed in bodies and voices more than in the pigment itself. The image was only the surviving part of a larger act. That is why we must avoid two mistakes. The first mistake is to reduce the paintings to decoration, as if early humans simply filled empty walls for pleasure in the modern sense. The second mistake is to turn them into a hidden script and pretend we can read what we cannot read. Between those mistakes lies a quieter truth. The paintings show that people before writing had ways to hold attention, memory, and meaning in visible form. They did not need to be books to remember. They did not need to be language to carry human significance. Their silence is part of their evidence. It tells us that much of early human memory lived outside the forms that later history learned to preserve. The cave wall is not a page, yet it holds the trace of minds that knew how to make absence return through image, place, and repeated seeing. Some cave walls were not touched only once. In a number of decorated places, researchers have found signs that images, marks, engravings, or later additions may belong to different moments rather than a single event. The details vary from cave to cave, and it would be wrong to imagine one simple pattern everywhere. But the possibility of repeated return changes how we think about the paintings. A wall that receives one image is already meaningful. A wall that receives marks across time becomes something deeper, a place where one human moment rests beside another. The first person who painted there may not have known how long the mark would last. A later person, entering the same darkness, may have seen an older shape already waiting on the stone. That encounter would not be like seeing a blank wall. The wall had memory before the new hand arrived. Even if the later person did not understand the first image in exactly the same way, the older mark changed the place. It made the cave a meeting ground between the living and the already gone. This is one reason the paintings can seem to know too much. They do not only carry the skill of one maker. In some places, they carry the weight of return. They show that human attention may have gathered in the same darkness more than once, perhaps across spans longer than a single lifetime. This brings us back to the early starting point of human history. Before written records, time was not arranged on pages. It was carried in remembered places, repeated routes, old marks, stories, elders, children, and practices learned through the body. A place could become important because people returned to it. A cave wall could become heavy with earlier presence because the mark remained visible after the maker had disappeared. When later hands, lines, or animal forms were added near older ones, the wall did not simply become more crowded, it became layered. Layering is one of the quiet ways humans make time visible. A footprint over an older footprint tells of movement after movement. A tool remade from an older flake tells of continued use. A new image beside an older animal may tell us that people did not always treat the wall as finished. They may have entered an ongoing relation with it. We must keep the language careful. We cannot say exactly what each return meant. We cannot know whether it was teaching, memory, belief, practice, curiosity, or something else entirely, but repeated use itself matters. It suggests that the cave was not always a forgotten accident after the first painting. In some cases, the place remained part of human attention. For people living without writing, such places could help hold continuity. A child might see what an older generation had made. A younger painter might work beside a mark whose maker was no longer alive. A group might return to a chamber because earlier images had already made it distinct from ordinary stone. The cave became a container of time, not through words but through survival of marks. Modern people often meet the past through dates. We ask how old something is, who made it, and what period it belongs to. Early humans may have known time more through relation, before this person, after that return, when animals moved, when cold came, when the group last entered the cave. A painted wall could quietly join those memories. The result, thousands of years later, is a surface that feels strangely aware. It is not because the stone had knowledge. It is because human attention touched it, left, returned, and sometimes touched it again. What looks like one ancient image may belong to a longer conversation between people, place, and time. When a later person entered a decorated cave and found older marks already on the wall, the experience may have been very different from making an image on untouched stone. The wall was no longer empty. It already carried a trace of human presence. A hand had been there, an animal had been remembered there, a line had crossed the stone before the new visitor arrived. Even if the later person did not know the original maker, and even if the meaning had changed through time, the older mark still altered the place. It gave the wall a past. This is one of the quietest ways cave art can hold depth. It is not only image beside image, it is time beside time. A new mark placed near an older one does not erase the first act. It joins it, touches it, answers it, avoids it, or shares the same surface with it. The result can look still to us now, but it may have been formed through many separate human moments. Each act was brief compared with the age of the stone, yet together they made the cave into a place where memory accumulated. Before writing, this kind of accumulation mattered. Human groups did not keep history in books. They kept continuity through return, repetition, teaching, remembered paths, and places that carried earlier presence. A cave wall with older images could become such a place. A person entering it might be meeting not only the darkness and the rock, but also the work of people who had come before. This brings the paintings close to the beginning of human social memory. Homo sapiens survived not only because individuals learned, but because learning could pass across generations. A child was born into a world already marked by the actions of others. There were known paths, known dangers, known materials, known animals, and perhaps known places where marks had been left. In that sense, every new generation began inside an inherited landscape. The cave wall may have been one of the rare surfaces where that inheritance became visible. An older animal shape could remain while the people who knew its first story were gone. A later hand could appear nearby, not necessarily as a signature, but as another bodily presence added to the same quiet field. Over time, the wall became less like a single message and more like a layered memory. We should be careful not to imagine this as a conversation in the modern sense. The painters did not leave written replies. They did not date their marks for us. They did not explain whether they were honouring, copying, learning, repeating, or transforming what was already there. But the physical nearness of marks across time is still meaningful. It shows that some places were not used once and abandoned forever. Some may have remained important enough to be approached again. The past in such a place was not abstract. It was visible in pigment and engraving. It was something the eye could meet under firelight. The new painter worked in the presence of older human acts, whether those acts were fully understood or only felt as part of the cave. This is why the cave walls can seem to contain more than any single image. Their power does not come only from the skill of drawing animals or leaving hands. It comes from the way human time gathers on stone. A mark made by one person can outlast the voice that once surrounded it. Another person can arrive later and add a second trace. The wall then holds both absence and return. It becomes a place where memory is not stored in words but in proximity. The old image remains, the new mark appears, and between them is a span of human life that we can sense but not fully recover. That layered silence is part of why the paintings feel as if they know too much. They may not know a secret. They may simply have held many human moments longer than any one human body could. The feeling that cave paintings know too much may come less from hidden knowledge than from the depth of time gathered around them. A single image already crosses a great distance. A horse drawn by a vanished hand can still be recognized by modern eyes. A bison made in darkness can still carry weight, tension, and movement. But when a cave holds signs made in different moments, the mystery changes. The wall no longer feels like one act preserved by accident. It feels like a place where time has folded over itself. An older mark remains. A later mark appears near it. Another surface is used. Another line is added. Another trace enters the same darkness. To us, all of this may arrive at once, flattened into one ancient scene. But for the people who made those marks, there may have been intervals, days, seasons, lifetimes, or spans that passed beyond the memory of any single person. This is why the paintings can feel so strangely full. They do not need to contain a secret message. Their fullness may come from accumulation. Time itself has become part of the image. At the beginning of human history, before writing gave people a way to arrange the past in records, time was carried differently. It lived in remembered places, repeated paths, older voices, inherited skills, and marks that remained after their makers were gone. A cave wall could hold this kind of time without explaining it. It did not say who came first, who returned later, or what each image meant. It simply kept traces close together. That closeness can mislead modern imagination if we are not careful. We may look at a crowded wall and assume one single plan, one single story, or one single meaning. But the wall may be more like a landscape of human returns. Some marks may have been made for reasons that changed. Some may have been added by people who understood older images differently from their makers. Some may have been placed near earlier forms because the place itself had become important. The sense of too much knowledge may therefore come from the fact that we are not looking at one mind alone. We may be looking at many acts of attention, layered beyond our ability to separate them completely. This does not make the paintings less real. It makes them more human. Human memory often works by layering. A place visited in childhood becomes different when visited again as an adult. A path walked by parents becomes meaningful to children who later walk it without them. A tool shape learned from one generation may be remade by another hand. The cave wall belongs to this wider pattern of inheritance. It shows that early Homo sapiens did not live only in the present moment. They moved through places where earlier human actions could still be seen, felt, and perhaps remembered. The stone held what bodies could not hold forever. It kept the trace after the voice disappeared. When we stand before such images today, the distance is almost too large to imagine clearly. The animals remain, but the climate has changed. The people are gone, but their marks are still near one another. The meanings may have shifted even within prehistoric time, and then shifted again when modern viewers entered with cameras, lamps, theories, and questions. The cave paintings feel as if they know too much because they have survived through more human forgetting than any object should be able to bear. They are not only old pictures, they are quiet places where many lost moments have settled into one surface. What seems like a secret may simply be the weight of time, held in colour, stone, darkness, and repeated human return. Cave art does not belong to one famous cave alone. It is easy for the modern imagination to focus on a few well-known places, because their images have become part of how we picture the deep past. But the wider story is larger and more uneven. Ancient painted, engraved, or marked surfaces have been found in different regions, with different styles, different animals, different materials, and different dates. Some are deep inside caves, some are closer to entrances or rock shelters. Some show animals with strong natural forms. Some include signs, hand stencils, dots, lines, or shapes whose meanings cannot be translated with certainty. This wider world matters because it keeps us from reducing cave painting to one local mystery. The human impulse to mark surfaces, remember forms, and create durable images appeared in more than one place, though not always in the same way and not always for the same reasons. When we speak about very old cave paintings, we are looking at one part of a broader human capacity, the ability to place memory outside the body. That capacity did not require a city, a school, or a written language. It grew out of the older human life of seeing, touching, moving, teaching, and returning. At the beginning of human history, Homo sapiens spread through varied landscapes, meeting different climates, animals, shelters, and materials. A group living near open plains would not experience the world in exactly the same way as a group moving through wooded valleys, mountains, coasts, or cold steppe environments. The animals watched most closely could differ. The available pigments could differ. The stone surfaces themselves could differ. So it is not surprising that ancient images vary. What is striking is that across this variation we still find repeated signs of attention becoming visible. People did not simply live and disappear. In some places, they left marks that outlasted breath, speech, and even memory itself. This does not mean all cave art had one origin or one shared meaning. That would be too simple. Similar human abilities can appear in different communities because human bodies and minds face related problems: how to remember, how to teach, how to hold important forms, how to make a place carry presence. A hand on a wall in one region may not mean what a hand on a wall meant somewhere else. A painted animal in one cave may not belong to the same practice as an engraved animal far away, but the wider pattern shows that early humans were repeatedly able to turn perception into durable form. This changes the scale of the question. The paintings seem to know too much not because one cave hides a single answer, but because many ancient marks reveal how deeply visual memory belonged to human life. In different landscapes, people found ways to make stone hold attention. They used pigment, engraving, touch, and surface. They worked with what their world offered. Some images survived because caves protected them better than open air. Many others may have vanished completely, washed away by weather, broken by time, or lost before any modern eye could find them. So the surviving record is not the full record of human imagination. It is a narrow window opened by chance, geology, and preservation. That makes caution necessary, but it also makes the surviving images more valuable. They are fragments from a much wider human behavior that was probably richer than what remains. When we place one decorated cave beside another, we do not get a simple map of belief. We get a scattered record of early humans carrying forms across darkness, stone, memory, and generation. The world of Ice Age art was not one voice speaking everywhere. It was many human groups, in many places, leaving traces of the same deeper ability to see the living world, hold it inwardly, and let part of it remain after the moment had passed. When ancient images appear in different regions, it is natural to notice both resemblance and difference. The resemblance can be powerful. Again and again we see humans using stone surfaces, pigment, engraving hand marks, animal forms, lines, dots, and shapes that seem to reach beyond ordinary practical objects. These similarities suggest that early Homo sapiens shared certain deep capacities. They could remember what was absent. They could control the hand well enough to leave deliberate marks. They could treat a place as more than a shelter or passage. They could let an image hold attention after the original sight was gone. These capacities belong to the human body and brain, not to one cave alone. A hand can become an outline in many places because human hands share a form. An animal can be remembered in many places because human life was repeatedly entangled with animal life. A wall can receive marks in many places because stone offers durability that skin, voice, smoke, and footsteps do not. At this broad level, the similarities are meaningful. They show that early humans were not mentally empty before writing appeared. They already had ways to make memory visible, but the differences are just as important. Not every cave has the same animals. Not every wall was used in the same way. Not every mark had the same position, style, scale, or relation to other marks. Some images appear deep inside dark chambers. Others are closer to light or shelter. Some animals are carefully shaped with strong body weight. Others are simpler, more schematic, or mixed with marks that resist interpretation. These differences warn us against turning cave art into one universal message. A painted horse in one region may not mean the same thing as a bison elsewhere. A hand stencil may not carry the same social or personal meaning across all communities. Similar form does not guarantee identical purpose. This is an important lesson for the central question, because the feeling that the paintings know too much can grow from our desire to find one hidden key. We look at repeated signs and imagine a code, but human culture does not work so simply. especially across great distances and long periods of time. At the beginning of human history, groups lived in different environments, moved through different landscapes, learned from different animals, and passed memory through local relationships. Homo sapiens shared a species-wide capacity for image, attention, and symbolic behavior, but that capacity was shaped by place. A cold, open landscape teaches different rhythms from a forested valley. A cave with broad, smooth walls invites different marks from a narrow chamber full of cracks. A group whose life revolves around certain animals may remember the living world differently from a group facing other seasonal pressures. The shared human ability is real, but the local expression matters. This balance keeps the story honest. We can say that ancient art across regions shows a widespread human power to make durable images. We can say that these images reflect memory, observation, hand control, and the ability to give absence a visible form. We can also say that we do not know whether similar images always carried similar meanings. The safest interpretation holds both truths together. The paintings are connected by human capacity, but separated by local history. They belong to a wide human pattern, not a single script. That is why they remain so compelling. They show us a mind familiar enough to recognize, yet embedded in worlds we cannot fully enter. Their similarities bring early humans close. Their differences keep the distance intact. And between closeness and distance, the cave walls continue to hold the strange evidence of people who were like us in body and memory, but not identical to us in world, practice, or meaning. To place the cave paintings in a wider historical space, we have to imagine a world very different from the one that later produced fields, towns, roads, and written records. Much of this art belongs to the long age when ice sheets, cold climates, shifting habitats, and large animals shaped human movement across parts of the world. People did not live in one fixed human center from which culture simply spread in a straight line. Groups moved, adapted, separated, met, remembered, and learned within landscapes that changed over many generations. The animals on the walls belong to those landscapes. Horses, bison, deer, mammoths, lions, rhinoceroses, and other creatures were not symbols floating above life. They were part of the ground people crossed, the seasons they endured, the dangers they faced, and the food webs they depended on. This is why the paintings cannot be understood only as isolated images. They belong to the historical space between human bodies and an Ice Age world. At the beginning of human history, Homo sapiens was still becoming a global species, not through maps and borders, but through movement, adaptation, and memory. To travel through cold environments required social knowledge. To survive among large animals required attention. To return to places across seasons required shared memory. Cave art appears inside that larger pattern. It shows that people were not only moving through the world, they were also carrying parts of the world inward and placing them on stone. Climate matters here, but it should not be used too simply. Cold conditions did not automatically create art. Large animals did not automatically create images. Many groups have lived close to animals without leaving the same kinds of surviving marks. What climate and landscape did was shape the field of experience. They gave humans certain bodies to watch, certain risks to remember, certain routes to follow, and certain shelters or caves to enter. Within that field, human imagination and social practice created the images. This keeps the explanation grounded. The paintings are not mysterious because Ice Age people had impossible knowledge. They are powerful because they came from a world where knowledge had to be local, practical, visual, and shared. Migration also changes the scale of the question. As humans moved through different regions, they carried capacities with them. The ability to learn from others, to make tools, to use pigment, to remember animal forms, to treat certain places as meaningful. But they did not carry one identical culture everywhere. Each group met its own landscape. Each landscape offered different animals, different caves, different stone surfaces, different pressures, and different memories. That is why similarity and difference appear together across ancient art. The human starting point is shared, but the historical path is not uniform. A cave in one region may preserve images shaped by one local world, while another cave preserves a different relationship between humans, animals, stone, and time. When we look at them together, We are not seeing one lost civilization speaking through pictures. We are seeing many traces from a long human age before written history narrowed memory into documents. The paintings seem to know too much because they stand at a crossroads of biology, environment, movement, and time. They carry the eye of a species that had evolved to notice life closely. They carry the hand of a species able to make memory durable. They carry the pressure of cold worlds, animal worlds, and moving human groups whose voices are gone. To understand them honestly, we have to let them remain both local and vast, made by particular people in particular places, yet belonging to the broad human journey through deep time. The most careful way to approach cave paintings is to begin with what can be known before moving toward what can only be wondered about. The evidence is not empty. Researchers can study the position of images, the surface of the wall, the minerals that cover or lie beneath marks, the pigments used, the tools that may have prepared or applied colour, the charcoal or other material sometimes found nearby, and the relation between images and the cave itself. In some cases, scientific dating methods can give a range of age, though not every painting can be dated with the same confidence. In some caves, the age of an image is approached through charcoal associated with it. In others, mineral deposits can help place limits around when a mark was made or when it had already existed. These methods are valuable, but they are not magic. They often produce ranges, not perfect calendar moments. They can tell us that something is very old, or older than a certain layer, or younger than another deposit, but they do not always give a simple exact birthday for a painting. This matters because honesty begins with the limits of the evidence. A painting may be described as belonging to deep prehistory without pretending that every detail is fixed beyond debate. We can also say many pigments were made from natural materials such as mineral colours, including iron-rich reds and other earth tones, along with charcoal black in some contexts. The exact recipes may vary, and the ways pigment was applied could include drawing, rubbing, blowing, spraying, or working with tools and fingers, depending on the place and mark. These details show that early humans were not simply making accidental stains. They were selecting materials, carrying them, preparing surfaces or using natural surfaces, and making deliberate visible forms. This connects directly to the human beginning. Homo sapiens did not need writing to organize action. The body and mind could already plan, gather color, bring fire, enter darkness, choose a wall, remember a form, and guide the hand. We can identify many animals with reasonable caution because their shapes resemble known Ice Age fauna, though some figures are uncertain or disputed. Horses, bison, deer, mammoths, rhinoceroses, lions, and other animals appear in the broader record, but each cave must be treated on its own terms. We should not force every line into a clear species when the evidence is ambiguous. Some marks are signs, dots, lines, or shapes whose meaning is not recoverable in a direct way. Their presence is still evidence of repeated marking, but not evidence for a translation. Placement is another thing we can observe. Some images are deep in caves, others nearer accessible areas. Some relate to natural curves, cracks, or reliefs in the stone. Some are isolated, while others overlap or appear near earlier marks. These facts show that the cave surface was part of the work, not merely a background. We can study technique, position, survival, and context. We can say the images required intention, skill, memory, and bodily control. We can say they show that early humans could make durable images long before written records, but even the strongest evidence remains evidence from fragments. The voices, gestures, stories, names, and full purposes around the paintings are gone. What survives is not the whole human act, but its material shadow. That shadow is enough to be deeply meaningful. It tells us that before history became text, people were already leaving signs of attention in stone, using real materials, real bodies, real caves, and real memory. The paintings seem to know too much because what we can verify is already extraordinary, even before imagination tries to add more. What we do not know about cave paintings is as important as what we can carefully describe. The wall may show an animal, a hand, a sign, a dark line, or a cluster of marks, but it does not tell us the words spoken nearby. It does not tell us the name of the maker. It does not tell us whether the image was made during teaching, memory, play, ceremony, practice, fear, return. or some mixture of human reasons that no modern category can hold neatly. This absence is not a failure of imagination. It is a boundary in the evidence. We can study pigment, surface, placement, and age, but we cannot directly recover the inner life of the person who stood there. A painted horse may have carried meaning inside a group, but that meaning did not survive as a written explanation. A hand stencil may have belonged to a person, a group action, a repeated tradition, or something we cannot name. A line of dots may look patterned, yet pattern alone does not give us translation. This is where the story must remain calm. The past does not become more truthful when we fill every silence with certainty. It becomes more truthful when we allow the silence to stay visible. At the beginning of human history, before writing, much of meaning lived in fragile forms. Voices disappeared into air. Gestures ended when bodies stopped moving. Lessons survived only if someone remembered and repeated them. Feelings, beliefs, and local practices could shape an image deeply and still leave almost no direct trace for us. This means that the cave paintings come to us without their full human surroundings. We see the durable residue, not the whole event. We see colour on stone, not the breath of the people present. We see the animal form, not the spoken memory that may have gathered around it. We see the hand, not the life that led that hand into darkness. Because of this, we should be careful with claims about exact purpose. It may be reasonable to discuss possible social, symbolic, practical, or ritual dimensions, depending on the evidence in the cave, but it is not responsible to declare one universal explanation for all images. Not every animal must be a hunting charm. Not every hand must be a signature. Not every hidden chamber must have had the same kind of sacred meaning. Human life is rarely so simple, and deep prehistoric life was likely no exception. Different groups, times, and places may have understood images differently. Even within one place, meaning may have shifted across generations. A later viewer in prehistory may not have understood an older mark exactly as its maker did. The wall could gather continuity, but also change. This uncertainty does not weaken the paintings. It protects them from becoming modern inventions. When we admit that we do not know the exact thoughts of the makers, we keep the people themselves from being turned into characters in a story we have written for them. Homo sapiens in deep prehistory had minds, memories, fears, skills, and social lives, but they did not leave us a simple key. Their images stand between evidence and absence. That is why they feel so powerful. They are close enough for us to recognize skill, attention, and intention, yet distant enough to resist ownership. The honest question is not whether we can force the paintings to speak, but whether we can listen without pretending to understand every silence. Scientific honesty does not make the cave paintings less mysterious. It makes their mystery deeper, because it prevents us from replacing the past with stories that feel satisfying but cannot be supported. When we say only what the evidence allows, the paintings remain open in the right way. We can see that people entered caves, used pigment, shaped animals, left hands, worked with stone surfaces, and created images that lasted far beyond a single life. We can see skill, we can see intention, we can see memory made visible, but when we reach for the exact belief, the exact story, the exact name, or the exact reason, the evidence becomes quieter. That quiet is not empty. It is the true distance between us and the people who made the marks. In a world before writing, much of human life passed through forms that do not fossilize. Voice, rhythm, fear, teaching, gesture, shared silence, and the warmth of bodies gathered around small light. If any of these surrounded the paintings, most of them are gone. The stone kept the pigment, but not the whole human moment. This is why careful uncertainty is valuable. It keeps us near the real trace instead of wandering too far into invention. At the beginning of human history, Homo sapiens already had the mental and bodily abilities needed for complex attention. That does not mean we can read their thoughts as if they had left a diary. A modern viewer may feel that a painted bison is full of meaning, and that feeling may be right in a general sense. But the particular meaning may be lost. A hand stencil may feel personal, and it is personal in the sense that a human body shaped it, yet we cannot safely say it was a signature, a mark of identity, a lesson, or a ritual sign in every case. The honest boundary protects both the science and the people. It stops us from using ancient humans as a screen for modern fantasies. It allows them to remain fully human without forcing them to become simple, mystical, or strangely modern. The cave paintings seem to know too much, partly because they stand at that boundary. They show enough to unsettle us, but not enough to close the question. We can verify age ranges in some cases, study materials, compare forms, and examine placement, but these methods do not turn silence into speech. Instead, they give the silence a shape. They tell us where the mark is, how it may have been made, what it resembles, how it relates to stone, and how long it may have endured. Around that solid center remains a wide space of unknown human meaning. That space should not be feared. It is part of the value of the paintings. If every mystery were solved by a single explanation, the walls would become illustrations of an answer. Instead, they remain evidence of a relationship between early humans and their world that was rich enough to leave marks, but too distant to be fully translated. This is the kind of mystery that helps a listener think more slowly. It does not shout. It does not demand belief. It asks for patience. It reminds us that truth is not always the same as completion. Sometimes the most truthful thing we can say is that an ancient image was made by a real human mind, in a real place, with real materials, for reasons partly visible and partly gone. The cave wall holds that balance. It gives us knowledge, and then it gives us the humility that knowledge requires. The cave paintings keep looking back at us, because they show that human beings were never only creatures of survival. Survival was always present. Hunger, cold, danger, childbirth, injury, animal movement, weather, and death shaped every life more directly than they shape most lives today. But if survival were the whole story, the cave walls would be harder to explain. A sharp tool can be understood through use. A hearth can be understood through warmth and food. A shelter can be understood through protection. A painted animal deep in stone belongs to survival, but it also reaches beyond the immediate need to eat, sleep, and endure another night. It shows that early humans could stop before the world, hold something in memory, and make it visible again where it did not have to be. This does not make the paintings separate from life. It makes them part of a wider human life, one in which the mind did more than react. The people who made these images watched animals because animals mattered. They used hands because hands were the body's first instruments of action. They entered caves because certain places could hold marks longer than open ground. Yet in the act of painting, these practical realities became something else as well. A bison was no longer only a dangerous body moving across the land. It became a remembered form, held by pigment. A horse was no longer only part of a herd. It became a curve of motion carried into darkness. A hand was no longer only a tool for grasping. It became a trace of presence against stone. This is why the paintings matter for the beginning of human history. Homo sapiens did not become human only when cities rose or when writing began to store names. Long before that, the human mind had already learned to make the absent present. It could remember a body after the body vanished. It could return to a place and meet an older mark. It could let a surface become more than a surface. These abilities are not small. They lie near the roots of memory, teaching, imagination, and culture. They show that human life had depth before it had documents. The cave walls do not tell us the exact thoughts of the makers, and they do not need to. Their value is not only in the lost meanings we wish we could recover. Their value is also in the abilities we can still recognize. The careful line, the chosen wall, the shaped animal, the human hand, the use of fire and pigment, the patience required to work in darkness. All of these reveal a mind already living in time. A creature that thinks only of the present does not place memory on stone. A creature with no sense of relation does not return again and again to marks made by others. A creature without imagination does not carry the living world into a place where the living animal is absent. This does not mean early humans were modern people wearing ancient skins. Their world was different, their languages are gone, their practices are mostly lost, and their meanings cannot be fully translated. But the paintings keep looking back because they meet us at a level deeper than language. They show a shared human condition, to live briefly, to notice intensely, to lose what is seen, and to search for ways to keep something from disappearing completely. That may be the calmest truth in the cave. The paintings are not evidence that prehistoric people knew everything. They are evidence that very early humans already knew that the world was worth remembering. When modern people look at very old cave paintings, the distance can feel almost impossible to hold in the mind. The makers lived before the written names of nations, before the familiar civilizations of history books, before the long chain of cities, empires, monuments, and recorded kings. Yet the distance is not complete. Something crosses it. A hand on stone still belongs to the same basic body plan as our own hand. An animal drawn with weight and movement still reaches the same visual mind that knows when a living body seems tense, calm, heavy, or alert. A line of pigment on a wall still shows the meeting of eye, memory, and controlled movement. This is why the paintings connect the modern body to a very old beginning of human awareness. They do not bring back the people themselves. They do not let us hear their speech or know their names. But they allow us to recognize that the deep past was lived by minds and bodies, not by shadows. The person who painted was not a symbol of prehistory. That person breathed, balanced, remembered, touched, and acted. The cave wall preserves the outer trace of that inner life. This connection matters because modern humans often imagine history as beginning when records begin. We are trained to trust the written word, the dated object, the named ruler, the measured boundary. But the cave paintings remind us that human consciousness did not wait for writing to become deep. Long before memory was stored in books, it was stored in bodies, places, images, and repeated acts. A remembered animal could be carried into darkness. A hand could become an outline. A wall could become a place where absence remained visible. These are early forms of the same human need that later produced stories, burial practices, monuments, archives, and art. They are not the same as those later things, and we should not collapse all human history into one simple pattern. But the connection is real enough to feel. Human beings have long tried to keep some part of experience from vanishing. At the beginning of our species' story, this effort was not yet written in sentences. It was made through gesture, pigment, stone, voice, and return. The paintings also connect us to memory in a humbler way. They show how much can be preserved and how much can be lost. The image remains, but the full meaning is gone. The animal remains, but the living herd has vanished. The hand remains, but the person is beyond recovery. This is close to the human condition itself. Every generation receives traces from earlier lives, but never the whole of them. We inherit tools, words, places, images, habits, and questions. We rarely inherit complete understanding. The cave paintings make that truth visible across a very long span of time. They are not only archaeological evidence. They are reminders of how memory works when it passes beyond the people who first carried it. Something survives, but not everything. Something speaks, but not in a language we can fully translate. This may be why they feel so calm and so unsettling at the same time. They place us beside the beginning of human image making, yet they do not let us own it. They show that our minds are connected to ancient minds through body, perception, and memory, while also reminding us that time removes more than it preserves. To stand before them is to feel both kinship and humility. The line on the wall is close enough to recognize, and far enough to remain beyond us. In that narrow space between closeness and loss, the cave paintings continue to look back. Perhaps the deepest question raised by the cave paintings is not whether ancient people knew something impossible, but whether we have forgotten how to recognize a kind of knowledge that once felt ordinary. The title asks why these images seem to know too much, yet the answer may not lie in a secret hidden behind the animals or hands. It may lie in the distance between their world and ours. The painters lived close to darkness, animal bodies, weather, stone, fire, hunger, and the slow teaching of repeated attention. Their minds were not better than ours in some simple way, and they were not unfinished versions of us. They were human beings, shaped by a life that trained perception differently. They saw because seeing mattered. They remembered because forgetting could be costly. They marked stone because some forms, some presences, and some places were worth returning to. We have gained immense knowledge since then. We can date materials, compare sites, study pigments, map caves, preserve fragile surfaces, and speak across the world through writing and machines. These gains are real. They are part of the human story too. But gain does not arrive without change. As knowledge moved into books, screens, maps, and instruments, some older forms of attention became less necessary in daily life. We may know more about animals as categories, yet rarely watch them as neighbours in a shared landscape. We may know more about darkness as a physical absence of light, yet rarely enter it with only a small flame and our own balance. We may know more about time through calendars, yet rarely feel a wall carrying the touch of generations without any written date. The cave paintings stand quietly between these gains and losses. They remind us that human intelligence began not as a collection of facts, but as a living relationship with the world. At the beginning of Homo sapiens' story, the mind was trained by movement, touch, sound, danger, teaching, and memory. The hand learned the world before it explained the world. The eye followed bodies before it named them. The group remembered places before it wrote maps. Cave art belongs to that older human ground. It is not a primitive mistake on the way to civilization. It is one of the surviving signs that human beings, very early, were already trying to hold experience outside the body. That message has value for us now, not as a lesson to abandon modern life, but as a reminder to become more careful with what we claim to know. The paintings teach humility. They show that evidence can be powerful without being complete. They show that silence can be honest. They show that ancient people deserve respect without being turned into fantasy. A truthful mystery is more useful than an easy invention because it teaches the listener to live with limits, patience, and wonder at the same time. When we look at the animals, the hands, and the marks on stone, we are looking at more than deep prehistory. We are looking at a mirror of human memory itself. Something is preserved and something is lost. Something is close and something cannot be reached. The cave wall does not give us a final answer. It gives us a quieter responsibility to look carefully, to avoid false certainty, and to remember that the first human histories may have been written not in words, but in attention. And if those old paintings still seem to know too much, perhaps the final question is this: what did our ancestors once see so clearly that modern eyes now struggle to notice?